He thought he could do what he wanted in his yard, since it was his. He planted exotic flowers and trees, painted his house bright colors, and installed strange sculptures in his front yard for years. It had never mattered to him what his neighbors thought about his unique style. Then came the HOA. Alan wasn't paying much attention to his HOA's letters at first. He considered them to be a bunch of uptight busybodies. In time, they sent him fines for every infraction: too tall a tree, too colorful a fence, too strange a sculpture. Although Alan tried to fight back, the HOA's legal team was too strong for him. Nevertheless, they decided to take drastic measures. Fining him didn't seem to be enough for them. In the end, he would not budge on cutting down his tree. He was able to enjoy shade in his backyard because of it. He awoke one morning to find it cut down. He felt angry, frustrated, and helpless. However, he wouldn't be intimidated by the HOA. It was no longer acceptable for him to be pushed around like that. Their ignorance made them unaware that he possessed particular skills that few others had. It was vengeance that consumed the man's mind. Now was the time for payback, after the HOA betrayed him. Calling his old friends was his first step. His high-ranking friends were unknown to anyone. He walked over to his cellar once the phone call was over. There were all sorts of tools he hadn't used in a long time in this dark, damp place. A detailed plan of the HOA's office was found in the boxes he rummaged through. While examining the blueprints, he imagined all the ways he could bring down the organization that had wronged him. The time had come to start working. As shaky hands gripped the tools, he began planning his attack. The consequences of what he was about to do would be far-reaching for everyone under the HOA's control, not just him. Alan Jones always had an interest in botany since he was a child. In particular, he enjoyed exploring his mother's greenhouse. Within its glass walls, the greenhouse contained an entire ecosystem of plants. Every day after school, he eagerly explored the greenhouse and learned about the intricacies of the plants. The plants had been cultivated and nurtured with such care by his mother. As a result, his fascination with botany only intensified over time. Throughout his life, he would remain passionate about this. He became increasingly dedicated to his dream as time passed. His interests in life went beyond botany. After graduating from high school, Alan decided to enlist in the military and took on a lot of responsibility. Serving his country felt like a duty to him. Having served for years, he finally came home, but he was not the same person he had been. His military experience had hardened him. During his service, he even achieved the rank of Marine. The many friends he made in the military remained in contact with him after he left the military to pursue civilian life again. The fact that he had friends like that one day would change everything, even though he didn't know it at the time. In his free time, he took care of plants, but he had other goals that he wanted to achieve, most notably owning a house. He wanted to have his own space where he could have authority over his own garden. Thanks to his service, Alan had enough saved up to pass a credit check and put a huge deposit down on a house. He thought that nothing could possibly ruin happiness now, but he was wrong. After endless efforts, he finally achieved his goal of owning a house that he could proudly call his own. As he stepped into his new home, he had already started envisioning the vast backyard that awaited him. Possibilities seemed endless, and he was determined to make the most of it. However, the real reason that he chose to purchase this particular property was standing tall right in the center of his backyard. On the sprawling property stood a magnificent oak tree, its branches spreading wide and providing a cool and inviting shade. Its presence was a blessing for the new owner, who could now enjoy a serene and relaxed environment, shielded from the scorching Texas sun. The tree also offered a perfect spot for planting delicate flora that needed protection from direct sunlight. He had never been happier in his life. However, little did the owner know that in just a few short weeks, unforeseen challenges would surface, putting his newfound happiness at risk. And Alan Jones thought he could have whatever he wanted in it. For years, he had been planting exotic flowers and trees, painting his house bright colors, and installing strange sculptures in his front lawn. He had always been proud of his unique style and had never cared about what his neighbors thought. But then, the HOA came along. Alan knew about the Homeowners Association when he moved in. Despite hearing horror stories on places like Reddit and Facebook about disgruntled figures of power abusing their positions, he didn't think much of it. Unfortunately for him, if he had known what would happen next, he would have been better prepared. Not even a month after Alan had moved into his house, he heard a knock on his door. He had no idea who could have business with him. But when he opened the front door, he didn't see anything. It was strange. The knock had only come just moments before, but now he couldn't see anyone. He stepped out of his doorway to look further down the street, but that's when his foot caught on something. He had to regain his balance before he tripped. It was a close call, but as he looked down to see what nearly knocked him over, he saw a piece of paper on the ground. It was an envelope. He furrowed his brow. Why hadn't they used his mailbox? He shrugged off his suspicions and took the mail inside. He put it on the table and left it there to read at some other point. But the next morning, when he woke up, there was another letter in the same exact spot. He was too curious for his own good and opened this one. It was from the same people as the first, the Homeowners Association. He didn't know what to expect as he started reading the letters printed on the soft paper. But there was nothing soft about the words inside. They were harsh, insensitive, and patronizing. He couldn't believe this was how they greeted a new homeowner, but there would be even more implications as he read. The letter read, "Dear Mr. Jones, I wish you well. Welcome to the neighborhood. Unfortunately, your property already has an infraction that we need to address." The letter continued, "The tree in your backyard is an eyesore compared to the rest of the neighborhood. Kindly remove it so that we can proceed in a kindly manner." Rage filled his body as he finished reading the letter. He ripped open the first, and it had the exact same words printed on it, except the deadline. He apparently had a calendar month to cut it down. Otherwise, there would be repercussions. The tree was one of the biggest reasons why he decided to move in, and now they wanted him to remove it. He wouldn't listen to them because he thought it wasn't fair in the slightest. He decided that he would push back against the allegations, but he had no idea that it would escalate so much. The next day, Alan decided to trim some of the larger branches off of the oak tree, but as he did, he saw something that made his blood run cold. Up on his ladder, he could see over his fence and into his neighbor's backyard. There, he saw an elderly woman, but she didn't look happy to see him in the slightest. She looked at him in disgust. Was everyone out to get him? He tried ignoring her stares and trimmed up the tree. Maybe it would help get the HOA off of his back. But as he went back inside to rest, he had no idea what was coming. When Alan woke up the next morning and looked out of his window, he was horrified to see that his beautiful tree had been cut down. He was filled with a mixture of anger, frustration, and a sense of powerlessness. It was evident that the HOA had taken matters into their own hands, and Alan knew that he had to take action. As he stood there, staring at the empty space where his tree once stood, he wondered how they had managed to do it. His thoughts went back to the angry neighbor who had been causing him trouble for a long time. He was almost sure that she had lodged the complaint in the first place, which had ultimately sealed his tree's fate. Alan felt wronged by the HOA. He made the decision to stand up for himself. He was not going to tolerate anyone treating him unfairly. He felt that he possessed unique abilities that could help him seek revenge. The idea of taking revenge consumed his thoughts, and he was determined to make them pay for their actions. He decided to reach out to some old acquaintances who he believed could assist him in his quest for retribution. With nobody having a clue about his influential connections, he finished his phone call and headed straight towards the cellar. The place was poorly lit and had an unpleasant, musty odor. The cellar was stacked with all kinds of tools, some of which had not seen the light of day in years. He began searching through the boxes until he eventually located the object of his search. His heart was pounding so hard that he could feel it in his ears as he studied the intricate blueprints that had been sent to him by his friend. His mind raced with all the ways he could bring down the organization that had wronged him. He could almost taste his revenge. With trembling hands, he reached for his tools and began to meticulously plan his attack, going over every detail with a fine-toothed comb. He knew that what he was about to do would have far-reaching consequences, not just for himself, but for everyone under the tyrannical control of the HOA. The stakes were high, but he was determined to see it through to the end. That night, Alan sneaked into the HOA's office and hacked into their computer system. He had learned the basics from his time in the Marine Corps. He deleted all of their records and replaced them with his own version of the rules. From now on, he was in charge, and the HOA had to follow his commands. The next day, the HOA received a letter from Alan Jones Escale. It stated that all fines had been rescinded. The members of the HOA were stunned and confused, but they didn't dare to defy Alan. They couldn't prove that he had done anything, but the message was clear. They knew no longer than to mess with him again. Alan was happy, and his yard was once again filled with exotic flowers and sculptures.